Greetings from Père Ankh. This is Ayi Kwei Armah speaking to you from Popenguine in Senegal. Père Ankh is an African publishing cooperative. It's our vocation to produce, publish, and sell books of essays and fiction about Africa's intellectual culture, accurately researched. The Healers is one of our books. It's a historical novel set in the 19th century, in the period when Europe and America shifted from their slave-raiding economies in Africa to set up a different form of extractive economy, the export of African natural resources managed by plantation-style states. At that time, these wealth-exporting states were called European colonies. Today, we call them African countries. The central theme of The Healers is one of the oldest in African culture. It's the theme of disunity as disease, unification as healing. This theme appears right from the beginning of the book in the narrative of two young lovers coming together. Ajua and Densu grow up in an African community subject to disintegrative pressures. They are in love. Their young bodies come together in the ecstasy of union. Better still, they experience a type of love that goes beyond physical lovemaking. They're both attracted to a way of life that promises to fill their lives with meaning. So far, so good. Except that the social situation is negative. Ajua and Densu grow up in an African community subject to severe disintegrative pressures. So the book contains other narratives beside their love story. The most significant of these other narratives is not personal, it's social. It's the story of a historical encounter between two societies, one African, one European. The social narrative is not a love story. It's a story of political and economic relations built on a foundation of hate and on the organized, systematic expression of hate, that is to say, war. War in European philosophy is the necessary process by which an armed minority compels a weak majority to give up its assets so that the conquering minority can use assets seized from the conquered majority to boost its own status and well-being. Now, let's go back to the context in which our two young African lovers have to grow up. A European army is waging war on that part of Africa where Ajua and Densu live. The war isn't new. European armies have been operating in Africa for centuries. During the first 4 of these centuries of warfare, European armies helped to break down African society into warring fragments. This enabled Europeans, using the help of ambitious Africans, to take away from Africa resources that they needed in order to enrich European society. Initially, Europeans took away human beings. To get Africans to help them capture and export other Africans, Europeans stimulated a process in which Africans steadily lost the ability to see themselves as members of one human community. Instead, they got into the habit of identifying themselves as members of tribes, not Africans, but Igbos, Fanti, Asante, Yoruba, Hausa, Mende, and so forth. As tribal persons, Africans could be used to attack, destroy, and export other Africans in the hope of making themselves richer. As long as Africans identified themselves as primarily as tribal beings, it was easy for Europeans to fund tribal wars and to collect the resulting booty in the form of captives. Europeans called the resulting economic system the slave trade. This novel is set in the time following the slaving period, when Europeans no longer needed to take away human beings from Africa. Europeans had had 4 centuries in which to profit from the slaving economy. In those centuries, Europeans invested profits from slavery in industrial research and manufacturing. Industrial machines made slavery dysfunctional. What Europeans wanted to take from Africa was no longer people, but the resources people need to improve their lives. African gold, diamonds, copper, bauxite, timber, oil. This was the raw resource export economy. To organize it, Europeans needed to conquer and control African territory. They set up plantations for extracting wealth from Africa. In the beginning, these plantations were called colonies. Today, they perform the same function, sending African resources to Europe and America, but now we call them sovereign states, our sovereign states. European colonies in Africa were perfect machines for the removal of African resources for use in the construction of European prosperity. The process impoverished African society, but a small minority of Africans could grow relatively rich if they positioned themselves to help the invading Europeans establish their resource export machines. This is the confusing context in which our young lovers, Adjoa and Densu, grow up. The situation confronts the 2 young persons with difficult life choices. Should they integrate into the European power system and economy in the hope of becoming members of the African elite? If they do that, they will become successful Africans because they will be given a small share of the new globalizing wealth and power, even if African society on the whole remained poor. Or should they work against the disintegration of Africa for African unity? These options are about visions of power and well-being, cultural and political visions. 1. The vision that puts Africans on the side of the European invaders, that is an elitist vision. It holds out a hope that the European power system will produce great wealth, power, and prosperity. All this power will belong to Europeans, but a small number of Africans will be chosen, saved, educated, privileged from the impoverished society, and they'll be given a share of this global prosperity. All they have to do to merit their share of privilege is to integrate into the European system and to work to maintain and strengthen it. This is the European vision of success for Africans. It is elitist. It offers salvation and happiness for a few Africans. Is there a practical alternative to this European elitist vision of success? Well, in the novel there is. It's a vision of working and living together that is not European but African. It's not elitist but cooperative. It's not hierarchical but hetarchical. Now let's describe the practical shape the vision takes. A group of persons motivated by a shared vision that comes from the most ancient of African values choose to live together, to work together, seeking a shared goal, healing work. They don't aim to become individually rich. They hope to make their society rich and to enjoy that increasing wealth with everybody in that society. The group lives apart from the larger society, but it interacts constantly with it whenever there is work for it to do. They just take care not to get absorbed into the European system. The healers practice a way of life that the larger society has forgotten during its strenuous attempts to cope with, to adjust to, or to succeed under centuries of destruction. The defining characteristic of the healers is their ability to see African society as one. To the healers, unity is not a tactical slogan, something new and instrumental in a temporary struggle. For the healers, the concept of unity is a natural principle, historical and teleological. The healers know it because they know African history, something the larger society has forgotten. Individuals in the larger society are too busy hustling or coping to care about Africa's lost unity. But the healers think it is retrievable, and they're willing to spend their lives working for that retrieval, because for them, the retrieval of unity is the retrieval of health. That's their work. In that work, the central organizing value is the concept of disunity as disease and of unity as healing antidote. The healers work on three levels. Physically, they work to reverse bodily breakdown and disunity. Against psychosomatic illness, they work to restore the broken unity of bodies alienated from their souls. On the social level, they work to reawaken the lost sense of a common humanity between divided African groups, families, tribes, clans, religions, classes. What attracts Ajua and Densu to healing as a lifetime profession is that the healers have a practical philosophy of life, and it's based on love, not hate. That philosophy is articulated around wholeness as a life-giving value. Choosing to work as healers means these young persons commit to searching constantly for ways of restoring natural and logical unities, however long lost. If loss of unity takes the form of physical breakdown between parts of a body, the healers find a way to set broken bones to repair torn ligaments. Where the problem is a loss of unity between individual persons and their souls, the healers help their patients investigate the causes of the sickening rupture in order to clear the path toward a recovery of lost unity. And where the disease is social, turning fellow Africans into tribal, national, or religious enemies, the healers remind the lost souls of a time before tribal enmities and help them retrieve their innate capacity for social cohesion. Ultimately, the work of the healers is about unity as a central, necessary, life-giving value. It requires knowledge of plants and substances with a power to help in the restoration of lost strength through unity. It requires knowledge of African history all the way back to our most ancient beginnings, because that kind of history-based self-knowledge contains antidotes to the divisive poisons that corrode society. In that sense, the way of the healers is no different from a way of knowledge of Africa's ancient regenerative values. This is what the novel, The Healers,